you're writing it in a scholarly way,
right.
The same kind of standards you would do if you were writing a biography of Harry Truman or something like that. You're crossing the T's, you're dotting the I's, great research. But what happens to you in historical circles, in historian circles, I should say? Did they look at you like you're crazy?
Well, yeah, I left the formal world of academia when I dived into the UFO research field. And for about a year, almost 2 years, when I was doing dissertation PhD work, at the last couple of years of that, I was doing UFO research too. And the thing was, I couldn't bring UFO data into the university setting like that. It would be the most career-ending kind of move. It's hard to describe. The mindset within the formal academic world, it's one of mortal terror of having to deal with a UFO topic, unless you were to deal with it as a cultural phenomenon and to, in essence, disable it.
Or make fun of it. Yeah.
Right. But if you were actually to believe this, then it is a career killer. The only academician who's a tenured professor who's teaching this on a regular basis anywhere in the country, I believe, is Dr. David Jacobs over at Temple University. And he has spoken many times about how it's hurt him. Now, for me, there are very few professional historians who will talk to me. There are some, though. And, in fact, I will get emails and phone calls from a number of tenured professional historians who really admire my work. They tell me this. One gentleman
off the record, though.
Off the record, always.
Yeah.
One was a department chair at UCLA, not in history, but another department over there, and whispered into the phone. He was literally whispering into the phone, saying, "I really like your work. I think you're great. I had a sighting myself once." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that, but why are you whispering?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't even realize." But he said, "You have to understand, my department is so political. I got enough problems as it is. If they knew that I was interested in this problem, it would kill me."
But here you are. You're the same guy. You're the same guy who's written papers on other historical issues and personalities. You've done the same kinds of research. You have the same meticulous standards.
Exactly.
You approach this topic in the same way, and yet you're chastised for it.
Well, I do. Right. You can only do what you believe in. I'm the kind of person, I've always been like this. I was 10 years old. I was the same way. My mother will tell you this. She said, "You've always known who you are." And my dad was he's a retired New York City cop. And I grew up with my father telling me when I was a little kid that you can be a minority of one. And if you have truth, if you believe in what you do, you've got to be willing to fight for it. And I'll tell you, I took it to heart. I've always been this way. I've always had my own mind. And when I got the UFO bug, so to speak, I could not let go of this. I had to pursue it. And if it meant not getting a tenured teaching position at some university, which is what it did mean, then so be it. I look back sometimes with a little bit of chagrin over that decision. Life could have been easier for me had I gone a different route, but it would have been a lot less interesting. And I can tell you I have no regrets, none.
Well, my line to that would be, can I get an amen? Because I know right where you're coming from. By the way, I want to mention something earlier, Richard. You had mentioned this fax on Washington. If people are interested in sending a message to the government that urges disclosure, a couple of folks have got the email address wrong. It's not fax, F-A-C-T-S. It's fax, like you'd send a fax, F-A-X.
Yes.
So it's faxonwashington.org. That's Stephen Bassett's website. And also on the Coast to Coast website, you'll find Richard Dolan's site, keyholepublishing.com, if you want to get some information about Volume 2, when the book comes out. When is it coming out?
Springtime. I'm thinking, in fact, if assuming Stephen Bassett has the X conference, he has that every year. If that goes on in April as planned, my book will be available for purchase at that time. It's in the home stretch right now, and I'm just going over some final polishing here and there. We've got to index it. We've got to do a couple of things, get it out to the printer, but I think it will be ready by the springtime.
Of course, one of the focuses is, as we have been discussing, is disinformation. Is there still a disinformation effort underway, or did they, they've successfully planted those seeds, and now academia and media and things like that don't take it seriously without any extra prodding?
It's possible, yeah. I think that disinformation doesn't go away. I think that the most significant measure of control, pardon me, I think occurs through the academic and media channels, and I think this is what keeps the topic safe for the time being. But I wonder, there are all kinds of stories that have surfaced in the last couple of years. There's the Serpo story that was all the rage a couple of years ago, and I know you're very familiar with this as well. One has to wonder, this certainly smacks of disinformation, in my opinion, the story being that there was a human-alien astronaut exchange, essentially, where it was some of our people went over to the alien world, lived there, came back, and so on. And that whole series of essays, the Serpo essays, were really very well written. I mean, they were interesting to read. It was a fascinating story, but I think it had all of the qualities that one would expect from good disinformation.
I remember being told by some people that I know fairly well who were in a position to know that there was a seed, a kernel of truth to that story, but of course then it was just turned into something else. And I also remember when the Serpo revelations were coming out, and one every couple of days, that somewhere right in the middle of that stuff, and you were probably on that mailing list as well, somebody sent out a survey. They sent out a survey form that basically asked, hey, by the way, are you buying this?
Yeah.
It struck me as pretty clear that was some kind of a disinformation program.
But right, I mean, and the point of disinformation is not that it simply lies. I mean, that's too simple. So for anything to be believed, there's got to be something that's credible to people in the know. And this is the thing about the Majestic documents. Since you just got me on this train of thought, I want to point this out. I was chatting earlier today with Stanton Friedman about Majestic 12 documents, and of course, as you know, he believes that the original small batch of MJ-12 documents are legitimate. He doesn't believe that the majority of the subsequent documents released are legitimate. I'm not so sure, and I brought this up with him, but here's the thing. When you stack up all of those documents, all right, and these are available on the website of Dr. Bob and Ryan Wood, and I don't have their website off the top of my head, but you can search it. But when you print them and stack them, it's about 2 inches or more thick. We're talking about a lot of documents here. And so if those, and they look real, they have the feel of a real document, in my opinion, and they all deal with detailed, nuances of the UFO and alien reality here. So if they are hoaxes, if they're fake, they are disinformation of the highest order. And you have to ask yourself, are they complete fabrications, making these stories up out of whole cloth? Who would they be designed to fool? I mean, us, me, you?
The Russians?
Well, the Russians maybe. Now, if they're designed against the Russians, that makes it interesting because you have to assume the Russians wouldn't buy any of this ET stuff unless they had reason to think that it was true, unless they had their own encounters with ETs.
Well, we only need about 2 hours to talk about that, Rich. You and I can have a conversation about that as well. One of the stories near and dear to my heart, of course, is Area 51, Bob Lazar, all that stuff. And, a lot of the UFO hierarchy is completely dismissed it for whatever reason. You're one of the few who doesn't. Doesn't mean you endorse it, but you have it as is still in the open basket, right?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, whenever I hear you, George, talk about Bob Lazar's story, I always find myself thinking that this perspective, your perspective, is really the one that I'm personally closest to of other people who are out there. And let me just make my own position fairly clear here. I have not met with Bob Lazar, and I've met a couple of people who've had interactions with him and who know him pretty well. I don't know Bob Lazar, so let me just get that straight. But I've read, most of his transcripts, all of his interviews that he gave over the years. I mean, I'm very familiar with what he has said. And it strikes me that his statements are totally consistent. He has not changed anything significant that I am aware of, nor have I ever gotten the idea that Bob Lazar really tried to capitalize on his fame. Other than he made one video, it's true, on his knowledge of Area 51, but it's not like he's really done any follow-up on this or really done anything to promote himself. On the contrary, I get the sense about this man that he's